Hello, welcome to week 38 of our Through My Bible in 1 year series here at St. John's. We are getting near the home stretch and we are about to, this coming week, finish up the book of Isaiah and go back and finish up the books of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles as well. In your readings for this week, you had read a large chunk of the second half of Isaiah that was filled with messianic prophecies. And I asked you to consider how much about the Messiah we learn just from these chapters of Isaiah. Now, this is hardly an exhaustive list. There are plenty more examples that you could pick out, but some of the ones I picked out is that you see in chapter 45, he will save all the earth. The Savior isn't just sent to God's people of Israel. In chapters 52 and 53, there are all sorts of details about Jesus' suffering. He will suffer greatly, the Messiah will, these chapters tell us, to the point of even dying. Chapter 53 also tells us that as he suffers, the Savior will carry his people's sins with him. That concept of a substitutionary sacrifice is laid out very clearly in Isaiah chapter 53. Chapter 55 tells us that the Savior's salvation comes with no cost to the ones that he saves, absolutely free. Chapter 60 takes us back to the Savior's birth and prophesies that when the Savior comes to earth, gold and incense will be brought to him from the east, a preview of what the wise men would do at Epiphany. And as I said too, that's hardly an exhaustive list. You probably came up with some other things that Isaiah chapters 45 through 63 talk about in the context of the Savior coming. And then as you read through and finished up Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, I asked you to look primarily at chapters 13 and 15, which are keystone chapters in the Bible, frequently labeled as the love chapter of the Bible and the resurrection chapter of the Bible, and answer an agree or disagree question. 1 Corinthians 13 is best used as a wedding text, and 1 Corinthians 15 is best reserved for Easter Sunday. Well, covering 1 Corinthians 13 first, love is patient, love is kind, and so on. 1 Corinthians 13 speaks of a love that all Christians receive from God, and all Christians are then called to show to each other. It's a perfectly good wedding text, of course, because there are obvious applications in a marriage of this love that God speaks of in 1 Corinthians 13, but it is hardly reserved just for marriage, and in fact, marriage isn't the primary social construct that God is talking about there. So we would disagree. We don't just save 1 Corinthians 13 for weddings. We use it all the time. Similarly, 1 Corinthians 15 is the basis not just for our Easter joy, but also for our very lives as Christians. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, our faith is futile. But Christ has indeed been raised, the first fruits of all those who will rise. And so every Sunday, every worship service really is a celebration of Easter. And though we do use this text frequently on Easter Sunday, it is not specifically reserved just for Easter. So again, we would disagree. It has use for us all throughout our lives. As you move on this week, I'd ask you to finish up your list of the kings of Judah. You had already finished up your list of the kings of the northern kingdom, Israel, and now you'll finally read the end of the kingdom of Judah in the chapters from 2 Kings and the corresponding chapters from 2 Chronicles this week. And then as you move on and tackle chapters 2 through 6 of 2 Corinthians, you remember that 1 Corinthians had a very specific tone to it. 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians were probably written only a few months apart. How do you account for the very different tones of these two epistles? We'll answer that next week and wish you God's blessings on your readings until we meet again.